Good evening, my name's Lawrence Harvey and I'm Director of the SIAL Sound Studios. But before we actually start tonight, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners and custodians of the land, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I pay my respects to their elders past and present. Welcome to the studio and to tonight's Salon event, which we are presenting in association with Chambermaid Opera. It's coming on the back of our day and a half microlab, which is part of the ARC funded project that we have with Chambermaid Opera, the Australia Council and Federation Square as partners at the moment. So the structure for tonight is that we've asked one of our research associates on that project, Greg Hooper, welcome Greg, to present a 30-minute talk on a paper that we've commissioned through that project. And then we've also asked artistic associates, research associates and artistic associates, Eki Veldheim and his collaborator Byron Salon to come and talk about the spatial sound design and composition for Another Other that was shown in Melbourne a couple of weeks ago. And that will be the following 30 minutes. We'll do a short pause and we'll rearrange ourselves, and then Professor David Forrest, who's also from RMIT and on the project, will then chair a question and answer and general discussion for us on that one. So I'll come back and introduce Eki and Byron when we get to that point, but now I'd like to hand over to Greg Hooper, who's flown down from Queensland tonight for this particular talk and then for the micro labs tomorrow. So thanks, Greg.
Oh, thank you. At first things first. So I suppose what I want to talk about is ridiculous to squeeze into 30 minutes, but the idea of music is sort of fundamental to meaning and social life. And I'm going to tackle that from a sort of biological perspective, particularly from a developmental biology. So I'm starting off in the womb and what happens there, how our sensory systems develop, and how that sort of impacts on how we attach meaning to the world. And in particular, I'm thinking about sound and music. Okay, so looking at, first things first, how sensory systems develop. So, and I'll probably call like little embryos and fetuses babies, or mix the two. You just have to live with that. So, first sensory system, this applies across mammals generally. The first sensory system to start developing is sense of touch. About 8 weeks, little teeny weeny thing, can sense touch. So what's happening first then really is this notion that there is a surface and something can impinge upon the surface, okay, and change the properties of the surface. That's really what's happening, in my view, phenomenologically, in relation to the development of that sensory system. The next one, a month or so later, by about 12, 13 weeks, babies will start sucking their thumb. So they're developing sort of kinesthetic sense, proprioceptive sense. It's the notion that they have a body. The body has parts. The parts are distributed in space and they have relations to each other. That's starting then. I mean, it's starting. It's not, obviously there's development to keep going on and on. But that's happening there. So now we've got a surface, and suddenly, from after having a surface, the fetus has developed a sense of there is a body, there's a volume. Chemosenses happen next. Chemosensory systems are touch, taste and smell. Smell, I mean, they both develop pretty much in terms of the sort of anatomy, physiology, develop much at the same time, but the nose on a fetus, on a baby in the womb, is sort of blocked until 30 odd weeks. So the sense of smell's not really happening, but taste is definitely happening. So now what you have is this notion of a surface moving to there is a body, moving to the body is in a milieu, because as the mother eats different things, the tastes and those chemicals propagate through the uterine fluids and the baby starts tasting them. So you're getting this sort of milieu. And then after that comes hearing. Hearing's really our remote sensing device. It tells us what bodies are doing off in the distance. We get vibrations from them. We also learn things like structural integrity and or a bunch of other things, but it's almost like remote sensing. So hearing then is the next thing, and it tells us about the outside world. And hearing starts kicking in probably about 16 to 20 weeks from conception. Limited range from about where sort of middle C to an octave up. Around that sort of range is where the hearing's sort of strongest for a little fetus at about 20 weeks, say. And then that gradually expands. So by the time 30, almost getting near term, a baby in utero can hear much the same as an adult human, right? But they can't, that's in terms of like their sensitivity. Things like, say, spatial awareness, the ability to be able to tell if something's there or there from audio, that develops after they're born. So I will give, I'll talk a little bit first. So you got this little fetus inside the womb, it's hearing stuff. It's got two pathways for hearing, really. One's stuff in the world, external world. That might be the mother speaking, which goes whoop, and back in, or it might be, cars going past, could be anything, doesn't really matter. So that's coming through the mother's body, and the mother's body acts as like a filter. And people do measurements, typically using sheep, on what the characteristics of that filter are. And I'll play something with that filter in a sec. But the main, in a way, the main most important channel for transmission of sound is through the body of the mother when she speaks. So that works out that even though there's all this background sound stuff that you hear about, like, respiration, and there might be, different things happening and tummies rumbling and all that sort of stuff, twice the volume of that at least is the sound of the mother speaking. But the baby, because of the way its ears are developed at that time, its hearing's developed at that time, and the filtering aspects of the body, right, doesn't really hear the whole voice. It hears a filtered version, and I'll play that to you. Okay.
I can't wait to have you.
So here.
Oh, my little girl.
Okay, that's a woman. I just taken this off of YouTube, found someone because I wanted it to be very like natural examples, not something that we'd constructed in a lab. So this is a woman sitting there, someone's got their phone, so you can hear all this background sound, and she's sitting there rubbing her tummy, talking to her little baby inside, and that, talking about how she can't wait to hear them, right? So that's what that sounds like when you just get, and I left all the background noise, even though I could extract it all, because let's pretend that's the background noise of respiration inside. Okay, but then if you use the filtering, all that the baby absolute best can hear.
I can't wait to have you. Oh, my little girl. My baby.
Okay, that's what she's saying to her baby.
I can't wait to meet you.
So you can hear that that's an unusual way of speaking. It's like a baby talk type of speech, which I'll get to in a sec. And the filtering, the way it works out is that it's not really possible for a child to learn, or a baby or a fetus to learn language as words or phonemes when they're in utero. The information's just not there. So you can do studies where you record in utero and people are speaking, and then you ask adults what's happening, and it's at the phonemic level, like ba or pa or ta or whatever, they only really can pick up about 30% accuracy. So what the baby's really hearing is pitch contours and prosody in general. So we've got like phrasing, and it's really a proto-musical language that they're getting. At this very early stage, what they get is a proto-musical language. And the musicality of that, I might as well play some of that now. Let's have a look. Here we go, this one. So what I've done is I've just grabbed a couple of pieces of what she was saying, and I've just repeated them so you can hear how it sort of functions as like a proto-music.
Oh, my little girl. 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 Oh, my
okay,
little
so
girl.
you're getting.
Oh, my little girl.
Oops,
oh, my little girl.
Stop that before you are forced to sort of kill yourself. That's actually, and that's not even the one I wanted to play, so I made a mistake. So you have to listen to it again, because this is nice when you hear the way the pitch changes.
I can't wait to have you. 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 Oh, my little girl. Oh, my little girl. Oh, my little girl. Oh, my little girl.
It's like a chord change.
I can't wait to have you. 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 Oh, my little girl.
And there's a whole rhythmical thing happening there. And then that continues on. Get back to the PowerPoint. Master of technology. Okie dokie. So that leads us then to baby talk, which is across all cultures. We have a special way of talking to firstborns, neonates, and that changes over time. There's actually a relationship happens there. There's an interaction there. It's not just we change, but babies change what they're doing and we change in response to that. And that goes across all language types, including sign language. Sign language has its own form of baby talk. So, I guess just basic formal things starts out with a slightly higher pitch, vowels are drawn out more, there's repetition and stuff like that, exaggerated pitch contours, that sort of melodic thing you were hearing earlier. And again, I'm just going to show you some more of that. Okay. This one is for a 2-month infant. I'll just talk you through how that works. This is a 2-month-old baby.
Hi, Smiley.
There's a mum.
Hi. Yes. Where's my hat? Oh. Hi. Hi,
So again, these
Smiley.
aren't forced things. These are people, playing with their kids and sending little videos, and it happens to be on YouTube and all that sort of thing.
Hi, Steve.
Right? There's nothing special about this. This is normal.
Yeah.
You see, you can hear what she's doing with her language, right? She's doing repetition. She's doing these really exaggerated pitch contours, and the baby is
Talk to
responding,
Mama.
right? And there's this struggle to speak, and you're starting to get this to and fro,
Ooh.
turn taking. Oops, hang on. Okay, so turn taking is happening. Turn taking, social relations, and it's almost like a performer-audience relationship is starting to build at this age of 2 months, even perhaps earlier. They're hearing all of that sound, but you've adjusted what you're saying and how you say things so that you have this different sort of sing-song, again, this proto-musical form to language. And that changes across the first couple of years. So first of all, you've got like little lullabies and gentle rocking and very soft sort of sounds for the first few weeks, which are really to sort of provide a safe, comforting environment. Then it starts changing to what you saw there at 2 months, which is trying to draw attention and build social bonding. And also you start getting emotional regulation. Language is being used for emotional regulation, to draw the child's attention to things. Happens a little bit later again. So you might bring out a little teddy and goes, "Who's little teddy?" Woo! And tickle them touch them with the teddy. All these sorts of things that you do with your kids, if you have kids. And even if you don't, if you're a childcare worker, they do the same sort of thing. Carers do this sort of stuff, right? It's really built into what we are as an animal. And singing also does, like the lullaby thing, they change the way that works. So we're building up this system. Oh, no, I mentioned this thing, I've forgotten. Okay, what the baby's learning at this time in terms of is that positive or social relations and positive emotional relations are signalled by pitch movement. That's sort of like the underlying thing that's happening. And by about 6 months, kids are starting to, babies are starting to understand pitch and melodic contour as relative pitch. So, it's the relationship between pitches that gives you the melody, rather than it's an absolute pitch. Okay, and that kicks in again really, really early, 6 months. Okay. Okie dokie. I'll mention this as well, I think. So looking at that sort of early developmental thing, proto-musical communication, and this thing that you're building with the kids of performer, well, I think of it as a performer-audience relationship, this turn-taking, foundational experiences of emotional nurture. If you ask adults, and people do, big surveys, hundreds and hundreds of adults, what do you use music for? And the answer, the main ones are self-awareness, social relatedness, arousal and mood regulation. So people use music for the same things as their primary thing that we use, this sort of proto-musical form of language, this baby talk language, as we're bringing up children. So it basically starts then and just carries through the lifespan. But that sort of music, sound thing doesn't really exist in isolation. You've got all your other senses kicking in, you know, and vision in particular. But not just vision, there's other things as well. Like all of your senses are developing, and as a fully behaving animal, they all have to be integrated. We see this early on, so newborns will look at the mouth initially, the mother's mouth when she's speaking. They'll tend to orient towards the speaking face. They actually find faces easier to recognise if they're speaking. Vision's pretty crap, really, when in the first few weeks. You know, actually for a while it's not that great. And spatial sound's not that great, so it's sort of a way of, you can imagine with, like, often with little children and little babies, they've got lots of people gathered around them. And that's so they can use this way of picking out, oh right, that sound with that shape is a good one. And I recognise that. Rhythm. Understanding rhythm starts at about 2 months. But it's not until really about a year before infants can tell if a couple of things like an animation and the audio for it are actually synchronised as against just playing at the same time. However, it's much earlier than that they can tell if you play like an audio rhythm and then you do a visual rhythm, they can tell that they're the same rhythm. So they've abstracted that idea of pattern really, really early. Oh, no, this is an interesting one. Sorry, I've reminded myself by looking down. 8 months old, so they're still little tiny things, can't really do much. Some kids, really early if they're even starting to pull themselves up on something. You imagine like two discs. You've got an animation of 2 discs, like 2 balls, but really it's like 2 discs. And you show them going across a screen, right? Like that. So if you do that, then, and little kids prior to 8 months or whatever, they just see them, you know, passing behind each other, right? But by about 8 months, if you do it so that when they join, first touch you go boing, it starts looking as though boing. They've started to make this, you see what, like otherwise it would have been they've just passed like that. But if you make a little sort of sound here, it looks like that. Because that causality, that notion that we wouldn't be hearing a sound and seeing a movement, doing something at the same time, unless there was some point to that. And again, that's, I mean, 8 months, kids aren't, you know, that's a little tiny baby, really. And the next main thing I guess I want to talk about is about movement. So remember I was talking earlier, like, you know, you got the little baby, you're going, woo, 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 and you're giving it some little, probably a nicer lullaby than that. But anyhow, when I was a dad, that was probably about as much as it went. So, and music's always really been linked in with movement. Okay, I mean, when you think historically across all cultures, music tends to happen when people are doing something. You know, they're dancing around or they're doing something. Right. Maybe it's a work song, maybe it's a, you know, ritual thing, whatever. Some, you know, bunch of people together, doing some action, making some sounds. And it works out when you play music to people, like if we played some music now that was sort of vaguely rhythmic, and really, when I'm talking music here, don't want to get problematic about it, I'm talking about the bulk of music that's happened over historical time that we know about and across all cultures, and not really, say, thinking about in terms of something that's really quite abstract and complex, although later on, if maybe I can discuss how I would think of that. But anyways, if I was to play some sort of music thing now and we were taking some scans of how everyone's brains were going at the moment, pretty much everybody, the motor areas of your brain will be starting to light up while you're listening to the music. You don't have to be doing any moving for that, but they'll light up as well. And they actually start coinciding. There's coincidence between some of those regions and emotional regions as well. So those sorts of things are lighting up. Most likely, you would be doing some movement. If there was background music going on somewhere, you might be just like tapping or something like that if it was sufficiently sort of grooving, you know, had a sufficient sort of a funky aspect to it. You'd all find yourself pretty much unconsciously moving to it. We just really built to be moving to sound when that opportunity arises. And all of this, oh, here we go. I can show you some social rhythmic interplay, which is really just kids being silly. So here we go. Here we go.
6th, is that right?
Yeah.
August 6th, 2012. Daddy's gonna play them a little song while they're eating their peas.
You guys ready?
There you go. So the point is made. Well, damn, you didn't get to see the other video, which was really cute, and it's too late now. So, okay. So here we go. Play from current slide. So this sort of notion that you know we're really sort of geared to do this music thing. I mean, I don't think they've trained their kids. I think that video is one of those things of play some music. The kids do that. Man, we've got to record this. You know, like it's just, and we'll put it up on YouTube because it's so funny. Okay, so. That's sort of, again, you look at that, well, you didn't get to see the earlier video because I didn't realise it wasn't showing, but it shows this sort of mother doing this sort of baby talk thing and the baby trying to talk in this social, this rhythmic interplay. It happens like really, more or less, you know, a couple of months max. That sort of thing starts coming. Okay, so we've got this sort of integrated system. You know, we started off with this thing that just recognises there's a surface, then there's a body, and then there's, you know, this sort of milieu that the body floats in, and then it's hearing this stuff that's happening outside, and then it gets born, and it starts seeing things move, integrates that with its own movements, and starts seeing, gee whiz, that there's a causal relations between the sound and of things and the visual inputs, all of this sort of stuff sort of building up. So we've got this integrated system with sound, vision, movement, and emotion. Remember, that was really the initial thing, is using sound for a sort of emotional regulation and stuff like that. Okay, all coming together to influence bonding within social groupings. So if you take a little infant and sort of dandle it on your knee, and you're playing some just ambiguous type music in the background, you know, stuff that doesn't have a strong sort of stress pattern. And you bounce the little baby in threes. Later on, doing various things, you'll realise that the baby from that time interprets that music as being in, say, threes, 3/4. Or you bounce it in fours, it'll interpret the same music as being in 4/4. Okay, so the movement has dictated that, dictated the interpretation. And the social and emotional side of that, again, other little sort of more, you know, experimental sort of stuff. You're listening to some music, got a little baby on your knee, or an infant really, this would be slightly older, and they can't necessarily hear the music, but you're just sort of jiggling them up and down. And in the corner of the room, there's a person who's also jiggling up and down. They got headphones on, they're jiggling up and down the same music. In the other corner, you've got someone who's just sitting there reading a book or just doing something. And then you finish doing that, and the people who were in the room, and they're not really engaging with the child, they're just there, and then they do something like, a classic would be, they spill something, like some pencils or blocks or something like that. Well, the little infant who's been jiggled up and down in time will go and help the person who was also jiggling up and down, more than they're likely to help the other person to pick up the things. Or if they help both, they'll help that one who was jiggling up and down the same sort of time, they'll help them for longer. They like them more, just because they're moving in synchrony. And that applies to adults as well, and there's stacks of experimental evidence on that. So if you get people to do that, they will then cooperate further and more so in the future, just based upon the fact that they're all sitting around a table, reading through some set of instructions while they're tapping a pencil, if they're all tapping in the same speed. later on, when you ask them to do something, they'll help each other more. So it's this, again, this like absolutely core human thing, to be able to look at people and think, thou like me. And I'd phrase that slightly differently. Actually, I'll show you this thing in a sec where this really happens. To me, it comes down to prediction. So I think it's because we're really built, our neural systems are really built to make predictions about the world, to forward plan constantly, and sort of, it's why computers are so addictive. Because, you know, you press a letter T and the T comes up. Then you press it again, and then it comes up again. It's like master of the universe. You know, every time, man, look at this, you know, I am in control. So we're really built for that sort of stuff. And I'll just show you now this final video, which this time you will actually see. Great. Okay, turn it down. Okay, so this is really famous, you know, video. Who has not seen this? Thank God for that. And, okay, so there's some sounds, you know, someone's concert thing. There's this guy here, he's sort of danced away in the way he does. And then someone else comes along and thinks, oh, I'll join in. Okay, and they sort of try and get a bit of a thing going. Not really working. There's an attempt, but it's fairly idiosyncratic. You see it'll sort of break apart a bit, right? You're not really looking at people mirroring each other's activities so much at this stage. Not at all there. Okay? So it's a bit of, I mean, you know, you can see there's something happening, and soon someone else thinks, oh yeah, this looks good. I'll get in on this. Perhaps not quite now. Here we go. This guy's coming in. Oh, it's all breaking apart, right? But these are all strangers. And then, after a few seconds of this, and it's still pretty unco, they're sort of doing their thing, and you'll see a couple others come in. They think that'll be good. And some more. And then some more. And as you see more and more people arrive, the dancing becomes less idiosyncratic. They all start mirroring each other, more and more and more. Not everybody, you know, there's variation. It becomes a bigger and bigger homogenous sort of group of people, you know, up and down. So for me, this is really where I started looking at this sort of stuff about a decade ago. This was really interesting to me. So how come that happened? We'll just stop him there. So I think I'll go to the next one. I'm probably running out of time, but it doesn't really matter. Okay, friends with benefits. That picture there is taken from the end of session House of Reps party in the US. And all those people there are like House of Reps and staffers, and probably the most ruthlessly competitive, self-interested people the world's ever seen. And they are worshipping the bass player, frontman for Fall Out Boy, who's the band who's shown them, you know, played the gig. So why would that happen? It's the same thing, really, that happened with the other thing, with the dancing. Really, it's the same thing that happens right from the start with a little baby. You think about it as prediction and motor behaviour. So when I first started looking and thinking about these things a decade or so ago, I was trying to understand how these people became, they're like leaders, really. They're having something's being attributed to them. And I started thinking about it in terms of leadership gets attributed to people, the person who maximally predicts the behaviour of the group. And it turns out in social science, there's a theory, the biggest theory of leadership it says a similar thing but slightly different, a less general version of that. So Mike Hogg, social identity theory of leadership, says, according to the social identity theory of leadership, it's probably ripped off of Wikipedia, but I don't know, individuals who typify the norms of their organisation should be more likely to be selected as leaders. Members whose attitudes, beliefs and inclinations typify the organisation are more likely to become leaders than other people. Okay, this is a prototype theory of leadership through social identity and prototype formation, when you can abstract that and think of it mathematically as who predicts the behaviour of the group most Whoever does that will have leadership attributed to them. And this is what I think that music does at this large sort of social scale. Is that we're all sitting around, or in a concert, 200,000 people in a concert, whatever it might be. I mean, some of these concerts are massive. And everyone's bouncing up and down. You ever look at the way these concerts work? It's incredible. You're seeing, 60,000 people all just jumping up and down, more. But then it'll be in waves. They're all feeling really great. Everybody else is doing a similar thing. They must be like me. They're feeling great too. I'm feeling the things you're feeling the things that I'm feeling. And I look up on stage and I can see it's their fault. They are the people who are driving this mass event. They're the person who maximally predicts the behaviour of the group. And because of that, we attribute leadership to those people. And if you look at the way, say, genetics work, and you think in terms of adaptive functions of behaviour, it's a fairly well-known thing that leaders tend to have more sexual partners. They produce. That's the male approach, okay? It also applies to women. Women have a different way of expressing power through adaptive mechanisms. But essentially you're looking at, say, the genetics of this. This provides a mechanism whereby you would encourage the continuation of music as a fundamental human activity. That's it.